Hello, I'm here to talk to you about sort of giving you advice on getting introduced to contributing to Django. A little bit about me. I'm an engineer at Revolution Systems. As of 2 days ago, the only employee, Jacob, at Revolution Systems. I'm very proud of, I guess. I've minorly contributed to Django. I've added pylibmc support in the Django core cache module, and kind of helped in a couple of other bugs, but I'm not in authors files, and I've never added much. So why you should listen to me, we'll get to that a little bit, but my hope is that you kind of can learn from my lessons of being basically a total noob contributing to open source. Now, contributing to open source is a big topic, and excuse me, I obviously couldn't cover everything in 30 minutes, let alone a day. So I'm not going to cover everything, so let's go over a few of those things. I won't be covering some things you probably should need to know before you get started. You should be comfortable with Git. You should be comfortable with virtual env. I'm not going to try and teach you much about Django internals. That's a lot of code. There's a lot of different paths we could go down. And I'm not really going to try and focus on people who just want to give back to community. This is obviously an extremely laudable effort, and I encourage you, if you just want to give back for the sake therein, to do so. And a great time to learn about that is, I think it's 10 a.m. on Saturday. Sprint introductions are a really good job. People jump on here, they tell you what they're working on. Seek those people out, they have stuffs for you. So what will I be talking about then? My goal is for all the people who have had a bug they wanted fixed, a feature they wanted in, or as the sort of saying goes, a pony. They have something they want in core. But they've been either afraid to, they feel like they don't have enough skills, they don't know enough people. To kind of get an idea of this feeling that I think a lot of people have when they get started, I asked about half a dozen people what their feelings were when they got started in open source and specifically Django. And here are some replies. I really like all of these because this is exactly how I felt. I really like the idea that it was the first day of school. You're completely new, you're afraid. Things aren't going to go well, you don't know how you're going to get by, you don't know how you're going to have fun. But the reason why I really like that metaphor is you do. A year goes down and you're an upperclassman, and you have friends, you have a niche. But let's see who actually said these. We have one person with a trading card, we have the writer of not only Pro Django, but Pro Python, and we have Carl Meyer, a huge contributor to virtual env, to pimp, and to Django. All these people, not only this isn't just them talking about open source, they're all talking about when they got started working with the Django community. They all felt it, and now I saw earlier today someone introduce themselves to Russ as if he was the celebrity, wonderful bearded celebrity he is. And you can be there too, and it's not hard, but you have to accept that you are going to be afraid, and that's okay. Speaking of Russell, he actually gave me a quote that I kind of want to sort of launch on. This quote's interesting because it tells the sort of you need to have a patient virtue. It's going to take a while to get your core in because we got to talk about a lot of things, hit a lot of blind spots. But what I really like about this quote, and Russ didn't add it, is the next line is politics is slow born of hard boards. It takes passion, and it takes perspective. And these are kind of contrary. Not quite, but if you dissect them, they kind of are. And I kind of split them apart into four other sort of what I'm calling, I suppose, the four virtues I think go in a really great contributor. And they're really contrary. And if you take anything from this talk, I have a lot of advice, small stuff, but this is the stuff I really want you to focus on. You should be proactive on top of things, constantly. But I want you to be patient. And these seem kind of contradictory. How do you be patient without, how do you bug basically core to make sure your stuff is getting in, but you're also patient and you're not bugging him? How do you strike that balance? And it can be tough. But when you find that balance, and it just comes through practice, you'll get it. Two other things that go kind of hand in hand with being proactive and being with patient is being confident and being humble. You need to trust yourselves that you have a solution, and that it's the right one, and you're willing to debate it. but you need to be willing to be told you're wrong and accept sometimes when you're wrong. Likewise, you need to have the confidence to fight when you think you're back and do that back and forth. Again, balancing these things can be really tough, and building both at the same time can be even tougher. So what's some practical ways we can build this? Let's start with confidence and humility. Before you do any code, before you even think about what you want to do, before you read any code, get the repo, run the tests. This does two things, and actually more than just run the tests, browse through the test suite. This will do two things, I think. One, it'll get you confidence, because you have this test suite you can run. So anytime you change code, you at least know you're not breaking things, or you did, and you can go back and fix it. But it also can humble you at what a community project this really is. There are so many esoteric edge cases that have a test written against them. You know, one obscure time zone, because I'll borrow a lanyard example, is on a cruise ship crossing the dateline tone. Well, if Django needs to fix it, then it'll fix it, and there'll be a test case against it, because I think the number one thing that I mentioned in my email survey to everyone I sent the email to, I also asked for general advice. That's what the quotes you see are from. I sent 6 emails, got 6 replies. The word test, I think, was used 14 times, and these weren't very long replies, so they care that you contribute tests. So when you get the test suite running, the asterisk is there may be a broken test. You probably branched off master. It's volatile. It might be broken. Kind of make sure you didn't break it, and then move on. You need to keep your passion. You want to have your pony, right? And you want it to be yours. You want to have that passion for it. So you've ran the tests. You've kind of looked at the code, and now you have something you want to do. These kind of fall into 3 very broad categories. You've got bug fixes, minor additions, which I'll be doing in a little bit later in the day, and a major contribution. Bug fixes are probably a great place to start because they are mostly binary, right? It's broken or it's not. I can write a test case against it and it's broken, and then you did my code and it's fixed. So it's a great place to start, but minor additions are fine too. Let's talk a little bit more about bug fixes. As I said, start with a test case, start with a test condition, write a test, have it break, do your code, it's fixed. Regression tests are a great way to kind of get started and get going, and then you don't have to write the test afterwards. That said, don't just run your test. This happens. Run everything. You might have broken something else. And even though you think, well, I did the test case and it shows it's fixed, don't think there might not be debate afterwards. There definitely could be. You could have broken something else that didn't have a test case. This could bring to mind the core developer reviewing it that this really requires a feature addition instead of just a simple bug fix. And I'll talk more about how to sort of handle that back and forth of review and proposal in a little bit later. On the other end of the spectrum, bug fixes, kind of easy. Major contributions. These are big refactors, big additions into either contrib or the core. These obviously require a lot of other work. Specifically, do your homework. Before you write a single line of code, spend a long time. I think last time I had to write something major, definitely didn't go in the core, but for my own sake, I spent a week, I think, just reading code. Search track, see if there's any tickets of people, not just doing what you're doing exactly, but something similar. If you're trying to add, say, a backend to Django core cache, see what had to happen to get other backends in. Look through Django developers. Not everything that people have thought of made it into a ticket. And there often is much better, more in-depth discussion on an email thread than on a ticket thread. And become familiar with the code you're reading. Again, read that code. So between these two, we have a bug fix, something's wrong and needs to be fixed. We have something huge and needs to be added. What happens if you just kind of want a little thing? Well, I would still treat it like a major contribution. Read the code, even more than you need to know. If you just need to fix one thing in memcache, read the entire cache backend. You might be introducing something that then breaks a sort of consistent API, and you actually need to change it on everything. This is actually what's going to happen to me in just a little bit. And what I mean by the go-ahead is not necessary is do feel free to contribute a patch before you even talk to anybody. It can kind of get them on track with where you're thinking. That said, prepare to be told that changes are needed. So this part, and this is the part where this is going to get a little nutty. I am breaking every rule I know. I have audio-visual on this. I'm going to try and write code live. I'm going to try and use the Wi-Fi. I'm going to try and push the Git in the next, 25 minutes. So let's see if we can do it. So I'm going to try and get a thing in the Django core. Maybe not committed, but at least there and ready. So disclosure, as I said, you need to be patient. That's one of the virtues I really want you to hold in. I did a lot of work. I did about a week or two's work of work. I've talked to core devs. I've written code. Russ has looked at code. But he's only looked at run version, and I'm hoping to do the second edit here live. So let's talk about proposing code. And let's do a live example. Russ, you want to take the mic? Hello. So, there's this bug. It's ticket 9595. That's all you need to know, right? No, I'll do this the right way, the way you're supposed to. Don't do that, and we'll talk about that. Basically, right now, in the Django core cache, there's no way in any of the backends to set an expiration that lasts forever. You have to set some date far in the future if you just want something to never live unless you explicitly pass it out. And in a talk 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I told people they should try and cache forever, which you can't do. I would like to fix that. My proposal is that right now, if you pass in a negative number, it just treats it as a negative number, which is sort of wonky. I'm hoping to change that because no one should be using that. So negative number is now representative of an infinite timeout, so to speak.
Okay, so broad principle, yes. Feature idea sounds like a good idea. Why negative number particularly?
It feels, so we have the other options, right? We could pass in 0 or none, which sounds better. Passing in especially none as a this has no timeout, therefore don't expire it. The problem is that we have a backwards incompatible change because right now none in the memcache backend and I think the lock mem backend, but I might be wrong about that, use it as a default timeout. And I think it's a reasonable expectation that someone's written code where they pass in a none value, maybe in a quarks passing, where they're like, please use the default timeout now.
There's an inconsistency though. There's an existing
With
inconsistency.
0.
0 versus none.
Right. So none is behaved, I think, sort of quasi-universally in that it's checked against and it uses, I think, default. But 0 is inconsistent. Yeah. Right now, if you use 0 on some of them, you get default, and some of them, the ones that actually use a timestamp to set expiring DB backend, file-based backend, it will just use 0. So it'll essentially set the key and then delete it the next time you try and get it. That said, this is sort of seems like a useless thing. Like, it doesn't seem like anyone's actually using for merit. So I think keeping that the same for now is wise. And then perhaps later down the road making like, okay, this is what 0 means, and we'll combine it all. But it seems sort of orthogonal to what I'm looking for.
Yeah, okay. I think you're probably right, it is orthogonal. Yes, we do need to fix it. Is that logged as a ticket in itself?
Say that again?
Is the inconsistency, the 0/none inconsistency logged as its own ticket?
I don't believe it is. That said, it is sort of, the ticket itself is described as getting things cached forever. It does get discussed in the comments,
right.
But...
Given that it's an orthogonal idea, you probably want to open a new ticket for that problem so that if we can fix one without fixing the other, then we fix one and we leave the other one open and we address it whenever it comes along.
Sounds good to me.
Get that in as a separate ticket. Otherwise, yeah, sure, sounds fine. Let's see the patch.
Cool. I will get on that. So this is where it gets weird, and I pray to the AV gods of the world. Thanks, me. So while future me works on code that Russ and I sort of came up with and the changes we wanted to make, I thought I would talk to you about some best practices and some anti-patterns on both proposing your code and writing the code itself. But let's talk about proposing your changes. Sending in your initial proposal, whether it be in a ticket or an email, is probably the most important step in the entire process of getting your code in the core. It lets you set a clear first impression that you understand the problem, you have a good solution. And in general, it's worth the core's time and the Django community's time to work with you to get this in because you believe it will get done and you have a good idea to do that. Because it's so important, it's really important to focus on some do's and don'ts on the content of your proposal. So let's start by looking at some things not to do, and then ways we can make sure to avoid that. It's important not to have a selfish tone of voice in your proposal. It seems like something really easy to do, that you're a good person, so why would you do this? You're not selfish. But it's really easy for an internet message to sound like it's you're entitled to the code, or otherwise, without even trying. If you don't do your research and make sure that you're considering all aspects, for instance, if you're proposing some change to databases, make sure you're focusing on all the backends that Django provides and not just one particular one. It's also important to communicate in the tone that you understand this is the start of a conversation. It's not going to get done in one ticket. Almost always it takes an iterative process to make sure it's serving the community at large. And showing willingness to have that back and forth, even if it's just in a polite tone, goes a long way and to a core member wanting to work with you. Let's look at some things that are very helpful to sort of smooth those things out and create a good proposal. Firstly, it's state the problem clearly. Make sure you don't belabor the point. Get to the show a ticket. Explain what's wrong. If it's necessary or viable, pass along test case. But as important as making sure the problem is clearly stated, it's you showing confidently that you have an idea for a solution. This takes off a huge burden on the core member reviewing your code. It lets them edit something as opposed to creatively coming up with something else. Creative energy is expensive energy, as programmers we know that, and if a core member can avoid that and just work with you on what's already there, it's a lot easier on them. It's also important to show your homework. Opposite of not considering others' ends is you've looked at other bugs, either previous tickets at attempts at what you're trying to do and why you think your solution is different and worthwhile. It's important to show humility and that you understand there might be some controversy and acknowledge those up front as opposed to skirting them around and pretend they're not there. And also another note on humility is if you're not sure of the best way to do something, ask for advice. Say you're not quite sure if you should do X or Y and you're wondering what the core thinks of it. So even if you follow all these steps, you still might get your code or your idea rejected. Like I said, that's probably going to happen. It's an iterative process. And if that happens, we'll talk about how to handle criticism a little bit later in the slide. But let's assume that your proposal was accepted and there's still some code to do. Either you didn't submit code in the first place or the code you submitted just needs a few changes. And let's talk about best practices when writing code. So speaking of code, future me should be fishing up. So Jacob, if you're not typing like git push right now, you have 2 slides, so I suggest really, really hurrying up. So code. Django is just a pile of code, right? And so you think it's the most important aspect, and really it might be the least important. Obviously it matters. You can't just commit a bunch of sort of ugly code. It's Python, like pretty, and it has to work and it needs to be efficient. But considering the time spent, I think, on most tickets, most is in the iterative debate and making sure that all blind spots on all sides are taken care of. That said, there are some general best practices to keep in mind when writing code with Django. So let's look over some of them. As most good Python, you should be keeping pep8 in mind. That said, Django does violate pep8 in some cases. Most notably is in the 80 character line length, but there are some other things it does that aren't really quite within pep8. So stay within pep8 unless you see it being violated consistently elsewhere, and then you can go ahead and just avoid that. Respect existing style things that go outside pep8, and just make sure that if you're working in code, try and find other examples of code that are doing the same thing. If you're doing a couple of for loops, see if other code is doing that or if they're using list comprehension, and just get an idea of what's already been done. Linters are your friend in the stylistic stuff, and just making sure that things are clean and tidy. If you're doing something that's either
unusual, make sure it's commented. You don't need to be too heavy in commenting because documentation takes care of some of that. But make sure anything that's either unusual or sort of out of the ordinary is noted. And it's really also a great idea to get someone to look at your code before you actually send it back. They don't even necessarily need to be experts in Django internals or anything like that. They just need to be someone that can kind of get you a second opinion and see things that maybe you were blind to before. Now, when it's time to resubmit your code, this is basically just reproposing, right? So follow all the advice that I already gave in getting a proposal. The only thing I would add is that if when you actually got in to really work on code, you noted you needed to make some serious design decisions, maybe on some of the stuff on the code you were commenting. And if you feel that there might be controversy, it's worth maybe in a wiki page documenting boldly why you did those things and why you think it's the best way to go. And now for the moment of truth. So Jacob?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Uh-huh.
Can you push?
I did.
Awesome. And Jacob?
Yes.
You look very handsome today.
Thank you.
And now I will go back to the landing moment.
May have violated the code of conduct. I don't know. It's me, right? I think that's fine. Anyways. He did all this. This is great. I don't have to do any of that. So Russ, you're not Russ. You can sit down. You have to look at code, but the code's there. So if you could pull it down. So this is the part where I tell you to steal your feelings, basically. Russ is going to look at the code, and he's probably going to find something that's wrong, and I have to fix it. And the key thing to remember here is my ego is not on the line. It was one of the quotes from Marty Olchin, and I love it, is you are not your code. You just repeat that to yourself, because it's really, really hard. We're craftsmen. We make these things, and they're like children to us. And when they get told that something's a wart on them, it hurts. But you have to separate yourself from this, because this is, while it is your pony, it's no longer yours once you give it away. And that's why I'm using the cake and eat it too line. So you need to do this, and you need to do this before you get it back, because you think, oh no, I'll be fine, and you're secretly telling yourself it's going to get in. So get ready for being told you're wrong. Actually, I have a story I might tell if I have time later about this, about that and me. So no, really, this is really, really important. I think it's the thing that got mentioned, other than tests, the thing that got mentioned the most in all of my replies. So let's say you're waiting for a review and it's not coming. This is common. Core members or even members of the community, because anyone can mark your code for ready for check-in. Obviously, the core team does the vast majority of it, but anyone can. And you're waiting for that, and you're waiting for this. This is where you get to learn that fun little patience with being on top of it. Because if you're too patient, you think you're being nice, you're really just being too passive, and you're not contributing this thing that you've already been told is worth getting in. So what you need to do is, with utmost politeness and understanding, this is a great use for Django Dev, is see if anyone can check it, figure out who's the best person to check it, and ask, can they check it now? No, when? And then check a day or so after that. It can be hard. One thing you can do at a conference like this, or during the sprints, make a friend with someone either on the core who's just contributed before. They'll have an idea of how to sort of ease those tensions, and so it's more like talking to a friend than talking to someone that you just don't know. So let's say you get the review and you go back, you get the review and you go back. Number one, don't give up. This is what happens. We all live, as I think, I've heard so many different accents at this conference. We live everywhere, all the time. And if you're working on one particular piece of code where the only person who really can help you or should help you lives in Perth, Australia, you need to maybe wait a day before you get an adequate reply. And if it's going to take a while, that's just what it takes. Again, Django Dev is a great, great thing here. You can figure out a time where time zones actually make sense. Your morning, their night. You can meet up. You can hash everything out, and you can move forward to the next big step. Django core devs have to cover a lot of ground, even though there's much, much more of them, so this is less of a problem. You don't, probably. So while they kind of were able to take their time, and hopefully this isn't a frequent thing, and I've never experienced this to a great degree, But try and follow up quickly, because they're going to start putting other code in their head really quickly, and it's just going to make it go faster for you if you get back to them quickly. So, Russ, now to the mic. You have it. That's convenient.
It is.
So, how'd it look?
Okay, start with the important bits. The docs, there is the rest formatting problem with the lines over 80 characters, so trim, reformat.
Yep,
Minor one.
I can do that.
The test is good in that it tests what it needs to test. I don't know that I have an answer for making it better, because essentially there's no way to test it. It's going to run forever.
The test is based on a similar bug. Memcache does this weird thing where if you try and cache for more than 30 days, it sets it to a timeout instead, which is similar, right? Because the best test is, time.sleep 30 times 60 times 60. We shouldn't do that. So I can't think of a good way, just because of the way the different backends, we'd have to monkey patch date time in some cases. We'd have to do all sorts of icky things.
Yeah. The test does, however, point out something that maybe there's a better way of handling it. Like you're currently hard coding -1.
Yes.
And the code will, in theory, the code will accept anything that is any negative value.
Sure.
So we've kind of got this magic value in there. It may be worth sticking a constant in for forever, which is -1 or
Yeah. And we could put class method on the cache object, cache.forever, because that's what you're normally importing.
Yeah, that could work.
Okay.
Yeah. Pulling back here, the pickle on the file backend, the first argument to the dump that it does.
So pickle, if you pickle the same file twice, it stacks it on top of each other, I think is how it works.
Right.
So right now it's throwing the timeout on it and then the file on it, which is what it was doing before. Now in the case of incident, I'm storing I'm saying -1 timeout. And that way when it gets retrieved later, it's like, this is a -1. I'm supposed to treat you special and not delete you.
Right, which is also points to why we should be using a constant, because then you're going to end up with, you could timeout -1 and timeout -2 and end up with different files on disk, aren't you?
Yep, good point.
So, I didn't know date time had a max, so that's an interesting addition.
That was Alex Gaynor,
Yep.
his contribution.
Okay.
Because that's something you need to call all the time, is the year 9,999.
Yep. And you're not in the authors file, so this is definitely, at this point, I'm amazed you aren't already, if you should be in the authors file at this point.
Yay.
So please add that in. But yeah, other than that, looks good to me.
Cool, I can get those things in. So, thing to note, I got told, I made a stupid error. I talk about PEP8 and line 80 length and docs and didn't do it. I overlooked something brilliantly obvious in that 3 of the 4 of the backends was saying any negative number, and one like, no, it's only going to be -1. And that's okay. These are things you do, especially 8 minutes on a stage, but anytime. You can just not think of it, and that's okay. And they're just there to point out what's wrong. You get them fixed, and then you move on. So that's it. Thanks to Marty, Jacob, Alex, Russell, Giannis, Daniel, Carl, and Jeff. They all either looked at my code or sent in replies. And then just one story before we take questions. It's my Malcolm story. I have had 2 run-ins with Malcolm. One is unpleasant. You can ask me about it later. Is on my end. I basically ruined one of his talks once on accident. It's not fun. But the second time was last US DjangoCon. I gave a talk on internationalization, and I, at the end of it, proposed some potential changes that may be coming down. And if you know, Malcolm, like half of Django code, it seems like wrote most of INT and N. So he was working on Django code, I believe, in the hallway, and then I came out after the talk, feeling good, and he grabbed me and said, basically what Russ just did to me, but like times 100. Like he listed everything I was wrong about, things I didn't know about get text, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he did it probably unfairly on my end, as if I was a peer. We were 2 people debating something, and he had much better points. And I cannot think of a man who struck those balances I was talking about more. So you're all here. Hopefully most of you are staying for the sprints. If you have not contributed because you've been scared, in the name of Malcolm, do so. So, questions?